Peace, everyone. I'm going to go through God Logic's claim that chapter 3, not only God Logic, but also Bob of Speaker's Corner. I'm going to play two clips where they claim that the Quran is saying that Trinitarians are basically, and that they're actually believers. And I'll show why this is false.
So the verse that says that the true believers would remain victorious until the day of resurrection is a lie, because the false believers have been successful and have been successful for 2 millennia.
And I will make those who follow thee, as in Jesus, superior to those who reject faith to the day of resurrection. So the Quran is making a claim, or Allah is making a claim, that the Muslim followers of Jesus in the first century would be made superior to all those who disbelieve. Now, as someone who has already said, and it's not a bad thing that you are honest to admit your deficiencies, that is not a bad thing. I'm not using that as some kind of ad hominem attack. You have said that you don't know the history of the 1st to the 4th century. That's fine. But as someone who has studied the history from the 1st to the 4th century, I can tell you there is no group that we can identify that would match this claim in the Quran. Actually, when we look at the history, we find that the group that you mislabel as Pauline Christians are the ones that became victorious over every other group. They became victorious over the Gnostics. They became victorious over the Ebionites. They became victorious over the Marcions. They became victorious over the Valentines.
Okay, back to me now. Okay, so we'll go through these claims. First, well, it's two verses. It's 355 and 61, verse 14. And we're going to assess and see if their claim is actually true or false. Is Allah saying that the Pauline Trinitarian Christians are the actual believers and followers of Jesus that the verse talks about? Because the verse says the criteria is the elevation, right? So we'll go through that claim and see if it holds weight. So there's two claims that really stand. The first claim is the followers of Jesus at his time, or the followers of Jesus now. Now, these are just titles for two conclusions that you can make, which I believe are sound. I don't know which one you're going to take, but both of these conclusions are sound. But obviously, one is going to be correct and not the other. And I want you guys to make your own conclusions and tell me which one sounds more authentic. So the reason that the first claim does stand is because the Arabic in 355, it says ittaba'uka, which basically means I will make those who followed you, which implies a possible restriction to the followers of Jesus, because it says I'll make those who followed you be higher than those who disbelieved until the day of resurrection. That's one claim. Now you might counter that and say, well, it says until the day of resurrection. If you go to the verses before, it mentions the disciples wanting to help Jesus above the disbelievers who, they want to claim laws that are not from God, and they want to make things permissible that God didn't. So then the disciples of Jesus would be superior to those who disbelieve, the disbelievers from the Pharisees. And that remains until Judgment Day, because people respect the disciples more than the Pharisees. And that will stay the same until Judgment Day. Or the Pharisees, the disbelievers from the Pharisees, will always be seen as lower, will always be seen lowly than the disciples, even if we don't know about them. That's the first claim. Again, I just do think of that claim. I think of it because of the word ittaba'uka, which implies to me that it's the followers at Jesus' time before he died. I will make those who followed you. But even that to the side, the other claim that it's the followers of Jesus now, it also does stand, and I will show you how. Now, the issue with Bob and God Logic's idea is that follow means that it means following the doctrines, that not being heretics, etc. But the thing is that the Quran does use the word follower as not meaning following in everything, right? In fact, the Quran talks about the Christians who had a heretical belief. Allah calls them followers of Jesus, because follower is just a generic term. It doesn't have to mean they follow in everything, because the Quran's usage of follow, the author's usage of follow, doesn't necessarily mean to be actual believers for all times. It doesn't mean that, right? So I'll give an example. Chapter 57, verse 27, I think is a really good verse that it kind of delves into what the author is using following as. So, chapter 57, verse 27, we read that it says, then we sent following their footsteps our messengers and followed them with Jesus. So it's the messengers from among children of Israel. Then Jesus came, the son of Mary, and gave him the gospel, the Injil. And we placed in the hearts of those who followed him compassion and mercy and monasticism, which they innovated. But if follow means that they can't innovate, according to God Logic's kind of view, how he's taking it, it doesn't make sense, because the author doesn't see it as that. The author calls some of the followers of Jesus as innovators, right? That makes no sense if following means they don't innovate, right? Then we did not prescribe it for them, except that they did so seeking the approval of Allah. But they did not observe it with due observance. So we gave the ones who believed among them their reward. This verse also shows that not all of the followers of Jesus are believers. Not all of the followers of Jesus are believers. Like, the author doesn't see follow in the same way that they are saying follow means. So I do feel that according to the Quran, follow just means like the member of something. It's not like as strict with the word follow that it means that they don't innovate in their religion. I don't think it's that strict. I think this verse is very clear proof that follow doesn't mean that they are believers, because the verse itself says that there are believers among them, and it says there are innovators among them, right? So the Quran doesn't see follow the same way that Bob and God Logic see follow. It sees it as a completely different way, which is that it's like more of the kind of the general thing. So it's like the Christians are followers of Jesus, the Muslims are followers of Prophet Muhammad, the Jews are followers of Moses, David, the Mandeans are followers of John the Baptist. It's just a general thing, right? According to the Quran. So according to this verse, follow doesn't mean that they are believers necessarily. Follow doesn't mean that they uphold everything. Follow doesn't mean that they can't innovate. right? It's not as strict as they are making it out to be. And also, follow doesn't mean that they can't disbelieve, according to the last part of the verse, that there are among them believers. That means that not all of them are believers. So even the followers of Jesus can be disbelievers. So now that we know that followers, according to the Quran, isn't used in a way where it's like everyone's a believer, everyone's fine, nobody is a heretic. Since we know that from the Quran, okay, then what highness did they have? Right? What highness did they have? Is it highness in doctrines? Is it highness in kingship? What is the highness? What is the superiority? The Quran actually says in a verse what the dominance started as, right? We can read this in chapter 61, verses 12 through 14, of what dominance Allah gave them after Jesus died, right? So let's read through chapter 61, verses 10 to 14. I'm reading the whole passage just so you guys understand the context. Okay. 61 verse 10 to 14. O you who have believed, right? This is Allah speaking to the believers at the time of the Prophet. O you who have believed, shall I guide you to a transaction that will save you from a painful punishment? It is that you believe in Allah and His Messenger, and strive in the cause of Allah with your wealth and your lives. That is best for you, if you should know. He will forgive you your sins and admit you to gardens beneath which rivers flow, and pleasant dwellings in gardens of perpetual residence. That is the great attainment. And you will obtain another favor that you love, victory from Allah and an imminent conquest, and give good tidings to the believers. O you who have believed, be supporters of Allah, as when Jesus, the son of Mary, said to the disciples, Who are my supporters for Allah? The disciples said, We are supporters of Allah. And a faction of the children of Israel believed, and a faction disbelieved. So we supported those who believed against their enemy, and they became dominant. So now we go into an argument. How did the faction of the children of Israel who believed after Jesus died, how did they become dominant? Well, we have to look at the context, right? So the verse says, Be supporters of Allah, as when Jesus told the disciples who will be supporters of Allah. So Allah is inspiring the believers. And by the way, Allah before those verses is talking about how the believers are to strive with their wealth and their lives, and how God promises them an imminent conquest, right? So this is the dominancy that Allah is inspiring the believers of in the previous verses before verse 14. So Allah taking the followers of Jesus to be dominant, He inspires them with He inspires the believers with the same example, right? So this is why I believe that in 61 verse 14 the dominancy was a military dominancy. Okay, now historically, did that happen? Well, it did. It did happen with the destruction of the Second Temple. And the Quran does mention that, by the way, in chapter 17. And then it says they went to the mosque from the same place that they entered, something like that. And then it mentions how they defeated the mosque or something like that. But again, that's in another surah. But even forgetting about that surah, we can still see in 61 verse 14, after Jesus, there was a military dominancy with the believers of Jesus, right? So, and by the way, in that verse, this is the first instance of the dominancy that Allah is presenting that He promised to Jesus. And that dominancy was a military dominancy because Allah is inspiring the believers to fight by talking about the dominancy of the believers of Jesus above the disbelievers, right? So again, there are believers among followers and there are disbelievers. Over here, the believers of Jesus became dominant. How? You might ask, well, those were the Roman soldiers. True, but the verse doesn't say that the believers were fighting. Chapter 61, verse 14. It says that they became dominant. And the way they became dominant, though they weren't fighting, was a military dominance. And you might be asking, okay, well, didn't Allah tell the believers to fight? Like, why is Allah inspiring them with people that didn't fight, that had other people fighting for them? Well, the reason is because Allah, He tells the believers to follow His commandments. And then if you look into one chapter in the Quran and one verse, it mentions that that Allah sent angels to fight for them. Angels to fight for them. So Allah inspires them with this, right? But either way, it's a military dominance that we see in chapter 61, verse 14. And therefore, my conclusion about all of this is that this is all referring to military dominance of the Christians above the Jews, that they will remain as such until the day of judgment. That's how I see it, right? Because the first instance of the dominancy was a military dominance, and so the followers of Jesus, which includes heretics, believers, disbelievers, disobedient people, they would become dominant over those who disbelieved in Jesus, right? So yeah, so this is how I see it. I don't see it as I see Bob and God Logic's interpretation as we read the Quran to be